You've got it. You better stop it. Ooh. You've got it. You've got it.
We are very excited to welcome Dean Stott to the podcast today. Dean is a former British Special Forces soldier who served in the Special Boat Service, also known as the SBS. After a career-ending parachute accident, he transitioned into the private security sector, gaining renown for handling high-risk situations, including evacuating the Canadian embassy in Libya. He later set 2 world records for cycling the 14,000-mile Pan American Highway. Dean is now a motivational speaker, security consultant, adventurer, and podcaster known for tackling extreme challenges. Dean was also awarded the distinguished honor of the Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, the MBE, for his services to sport, humanitarian, and mental health awareness. He embodies resilience and adaptability in both personal and professional pursuits. And what I would like to say is stick around for this conversation because it is really fun. And Dean has a pretty bonkers life and is an amazing storyteller.
This honestly could have been the story of my own life. Look, there's so many aspects of this thing that are interesting. You know, Dean's military service, how he grew up, his injury in that transition. But one of the things that I just love is how, you know, he and his wife together tackle pretty extraordinary things. She's also an MBE winner, award recipient.
Yeah, for her own work in human trafficking. It's amazing.
And the two of them, you know, I think if you're a busy family, if you're listening to this, you can relate and hear all of your reflections of yourself in his bonker story, as in like, how do you raise kids? How do you transition from different jobs? You know, when one partner is a superstar, how do you support that superstar and not lose your identity? This is a great combo.
Yeah. And I mean, he actually was the one who said that he and his wife, from a security standpoint, are like the Mr. and Mrs. Smith of the security world. And I think that is probably a pretty fair explanation based on some of the stories he tells in this podcast. So I think there is a lot to learn and be gained. And also, this is just going to be a fun and cool listen. Dean is just an amazing, fun storyteller. And I think you're really going to enjoy this.
What you're going to do afterwards, you're going to be like, Dean's my best friend. He really is. I wonder if you have the energy to keep up with Dean and his wife. Extraordinary conversation. So fun. The work they're doing, incredible. Please enjoy our amazing conversation with the one and only Dean Stott.
Dean, welcome to the Ready State podcast.
Thank you so much. Appreciate having me.
We're really excited to talk about a lot of different things today, but before we get into all of your exploits, I would love if you could just talk a little bit about your early background, because I know that it informed a lot of your choices in terms of what you did and what we're going to talk about today. So also just, you know, this is sort of a chance for you to introduce yourself to the Ready State audience.
Yeah, so I'm Dean Stott. As you can tell by the accent, I'm not from the US. I'm from the UK originally. Where I started, I was born into a military family. My dad was in the military. So every 3 years I would find myself up in a new location and starting all over again. At the age of 8, my parents split up at a very young age for me, and I ended up in a homeless home in Manchester, a place called Moss Side, which for people in America is like the most dangerous ghetto in the UK. So from a young age, I found myself fighting, trying to protect my younger sisters. But we got some respite a couple of years ago. My father got custody of me and my sisters, and we moved back down south to a little town called Aldershot, which was the home of the British Army at the time. So it was the home of the airborne unit. So it wasn't strange to see people jumping out the skies normally as you're walking to school. But so I was immersed in that environment, but never actually wanted a career in the military. I always wanted to be a fireman. But I started college. Our college is different from yours. We finish school at 16. We do 2 years at college and then we go to university. So it's a slightly different. So I finished school, went to college, and went on a surfing holiday with me and my pals. And it was supposed to be 2 weeks. It ended up being 6 months for me. I never came.
So say we all.
I didn't come home. I ended up working in a surf shop, and my father came looking for me long before the mobile phones in 1994 and told me that I'd wasted my life and what was I going to do with it. So at the age of 17, I thought, well, if I if I join the military, at least do 3 years, it would help with my CV or my resume towards the fire brigade. And so that was my choice in joining the military. But my father told me I would last 2 minutes. I was 5'7" and weighed about 130 pounds. I'm 5'11" and 200 pounds now. So it's two totally different characters. So I can imagine where he was coming from there. But the best course of action is action itself. There's no point in me arguing with my father, telling him I'm going to do it. The best course of action was to prove him wrong. And so, I went on and joined the military, and that started me on a whole different path than I'd anticipated before.
Do you think your dad knew that by framing it that way for you, it would be motivating?
We hear that a lot.
Or I mean, do you think that was a conscious thought for him, knowing that if, he said there's no way you can do this, that he knew your soul and knew that you would try to prove him wrong? Or do you think that it didn't even cross his mind? He actually thought that.
Yeah, I'd like to think he actually didn't realize how powerful those words were, and how it's still, even today, when I'm 30 years on, I'm still talking about that conversation. It could be reverse psychology, but it didn't sit long with me, because on the Monday morning I went to the careers office. I walked into the careers office and went back to my father's office, which wasn't that far. It was only less than a mile. And he knew that my comments were throwaway comments. I actually was going to be doing it. And so from that point on, he then started advising me and giving me direction. He thought, okay, he is going to do it. And so I think that was just that one comment, but that was the driving force. That pretty much got me through that foot in the door, if there was any doubt.
Point Break had already come out. So there's already a precedent for being FBI agent and surfing with Keanu Reeves. So clearly you are going to be, and I feel like maybe it's Apocalypse Now. There's some surfing. I can't remember, but there was this switch. What did your friends say when you were like, hey, I'm leaving being working at a surf shop? Because I can relate to this. I ran and worked in kayak shops my whole life. And then one day I was like, okay, I think I should become an adult. I need a real career, because this isn't going to be a career. And I think there's more to my life than, driving around in my truck with my dog, kayaking.
Yeah, Point Break up there with my top 5 movies. But this was before social media, so really no one really had a gauge of what the military was like. Actually, the only thing we could gauge on was Full Metal Jacket. And actually, where they filmed Full Metal Jacket, the training scene was where I actually did training in the military. It's a place called Basingbourne in UK. And so they were like, oh, it's going to be like this. And so you didn't really have a reference point. We just always thought you were going to get shouted at. But my father was telling me about, he one of the comments he said to me, actually, when I joined the military, he said he was jealous that I was now about to start a life that he wished he'd done again. So for me, I thought, okay, there's exciting things to come. It's not always about getting shouted at. And so it was always good having his ear as well, because you saw Full Metal Jacket and your friends are like, it's going to be like this forever. And my dad's like, it's not like.
No, there's going to be a lot of great stuff.
There's going to be a lot of great stuff, yeah.
I feel that way when I recommend a book I really love to people, where I wish I could be the receiver of that. Like, I haven't yet read the book, it's like, I don't know what made me think of that with your dad, but if it's like one of our favorite books, I'm so jealous. I wish I could be at the starting end of it, like your dad was at your military career. So, you went into the special forces and survived a really grueling 6-month program, which I'd love it if you could tell us about that. But I know that the end goal or the end result was that you joined this thing called the Special Boat Service. And I think here in the US, we don't know what that is. So tell us a little bit about what was that training like? Why was it special that you made it through it? And then what is the Special Boat Service?
And it's such a young age. I just want to say that I have a lot of friends who have worked in the Navy at high levels, and some of those kids came through at 19, and some of them came through after college, after being playing high level football in college, and they said it was they already had a framework for who they were and surviving being shouted at and being on these conditions. You went from surfing to this. Yeah, so a lot of people aren't aware that the Special Forces is tiered. So you have Tier 2 and Tier 1 Special Forces. So here in the US, to give you an example, your Tier 2 Special Forces is your Green Berets,
your Rangers, your Navy SEALs. They're your tier 2. I mean, your tier 1 is your SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, which is a whole different selection process from that. So our equivalent in UK, our tier 2 is the Royal Marines, the Army Commandos, and the Parachute Regiment. And then our tier 1 is the SBS and the SES. The SBS is the equivalent of SEAL Team 6, and the SES is the equivalent of Delta Force. So I did my commando course, tier 2 Special Forces, at the age of 19. So then I then spent 8 years in Brigade Reconnaissance Force for the tier 2 Special Forces, and then went tier 1 Special Forces for the Special Boat Service. But what was unique about this, I was actually from the Army. So the Army, you could only go to the Special Air Service, but the Special Boat Service, their recruiting was always from the Royal Marines. It was 100% Royal Marines. But you could actually go from the Royal Marines to the SAS. So they were losing a lot of guys recruitment-wise to the SAS because they just didn't like diving. I'd spent 8 years at Free Commando Brigade, who were all primarily Marines anyway. I mean, I was also now the senior dive instructor for the Army at the diving school, at the Defence Diving School, because of my love for the water, the surfing. That's what I enjoyed being at. But when I did selection, they decided that they'd open it up to all arms of the service. And so I did a week briefing course with the SAS, which basically you do some PT, they show you around, give you an idea and expectations of what selection's like. And then I did another week with the SBS, and they were both brilliant. But the big takeaway for me was the SBS guys were, they were in blue frog t-shirts, blue shorts, reef sandals, and Oakleys. I was at, this is the place for me. So much to the disgust of my friends in the SAS, I volunteered for the SBS. But again, another big difference between UK and US is SEAL Team 6 have their own selection process, and Delta Force have theirs. Ours is joint. We do it together. So there's no easy way or no easier one than the other. And so they tell you to be the gray man on selection. Gray man is someone who's not bringing attention to himself for good reasons or for bad reasons. You're just sort of flying under the radar. Because we started with 200 and we finished with 8 6 months later. That's about the natural.
8.
Yeah. So we have literally going to be my next question.
Yeah, we have a 95% attrition rate. It's the hardest selection process in the world. And your selections and everyone else's special forces is mirrored off the UK special forces, because we've been around for hundreds of years and things like that. So I was told to be the gray man. Day 1 of a 6-month course, the first parade, I'm sat on my backpack on this parade square in the middle of Wales in the mountains, and they shout out my name and they're like, "Why are you going SBS?" And I'm like, "I like diving." They're like, "Shit answer." And then I had to grab a rock and throw it in my Bergen, and this sort of went on for the next few weeks.
And of that 6 months, are there moments or stories that are particularly memorable in terms of just being difficult, or where you were almost one foot out the door? What like, for those of us who've never seen or been part of a training like that, like what was crazy about it?
So tier 1 selection is very different. Like tier 2 selection is what you see on Buds and all these other ones, where the guys are getting shouted at and they're carrying boats above their head. And what's the aim of the tier 2 selection really is is working as a team. It's getting guys to work together as a team. Tier 1 selection, there's no shouting at all. And it's that difficult that they don't need to shout. It's all about self-motivation. You need to self-motivate. They don't need to be telling you whether you're doing right or wrong. So for you need to be there. You need to have enough willpower to be there, yourself. As I said, I didn't really have any aspirations of being in the military, never mind the special forces. But there were some guys I was on selection with who, from a young age of 6, all they wanted to be was in the SAS or the SBS. They wanted to be in the Royal Marine Commandos or the Parachute Regiment and then go on. I mean, this was their opportunity in life. And so it was hard when I saw a lot of them fail. Because they put themselves under a lot of self-induced pressure. Whereas for me, I was like, well, if it happens, it happens. And, it's really hard to say, but when you see guys dropping off, it's hard because they're going, but it also gives you that little bit of motivation. But the one takeaway point for me was, as I mentioned, they kept asking why I was going SBS, and I told them I like diving, and they said, right, pick up a rock. So every time I would go up on, on the first month, we basically, you're on your own. You have a Bergen on your back, weighs about 70 to 80 pounds. You have a map and a compass and a weapon, and you're just moving from point to point. And you cover about 25 to 30 kilometers a day for a whole month. And then the last week is test week, where you have to come in on the times. And the final march is a 40-mile march in 20 hours. And you've already done 30 kilometers in the day. And so you are on your own. Literally, there's no music. Having music is illegal. You get kicked off the course because they understand it's a motivator. So every time I go to this one checkpoint, which had these two instructors in there, they would ask the question. I'd say, right, I like diving, grab a rock. And this was annoying me because I'm like, how am I going to get around this? So that weekend I went home and I bought Poole, where the SBS are based, is like the San Diego of UK, as Bournemouth Beach and stuff. So I Googled Bournemouth Beach heat wave, and there was a newspaper called the Sun newspaper, and it had, it wasn't really a classy paper, but it had a center page of topless women laying on the beach in this heat wave in Bournemouth. So I printed it off, I fabloned it, I waterproofed it, and I put it in my mat pocket. And then in Monday morning, I'm back up on the hill, and the same two instructors like, why are you going Poole? And I put the weapon on my feet, and then I took it out, and I said, because that's not in Hereford, which is where the SAS were. And they loved it. They thought it was, they were basically trying to test it to see if you'll break. And it was just I obviously showed them I had a bit of humor, and I made sure that stayed in my mat pocket for the next 6 months.
I love that. That's
that
hilarious.
humor piece is, being stoic, finding joy in austere situations. That is reflected across so many difficult experiences. We have so many mountaineer friends. We have so many kayaking expedition friends. We have so many professional athlete friends who, when it gets really gnarly, they can dissociate enough to remain objective, remain interactive, and kind of give each other the shit.
Yeah.
And, or at least be aware of that. You pick that up in that moment because you're like, I don't want another rock in my pack. Where did you start to see that? Because that has certainly got to be a feature that has served you very well as we get into your world record exploits, et cetera, to just remain disconnected. Even just when you said, hey, I want to do this, and I'm sort of unattached to the outcome. I'm just going to do the best I can, even in the selection process. Where do you pick that up? Is that from surfing? Is that your parents? Do you just stumble on that? Because that is a true gift.
What, the humor side, you mean?
Yeah.
I've probably seen it throughout my whole military career. And actually one of the ethoses, when you're on selection, they teach you about the ethoses of the special forces. And one of them is humor. You have humility, you have courage, the unrelenting pursuit of excellence. And they mention humor, because times do get dark. And so you need to have a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you're not in the right job, because, things sometimes aren't that funny. And so if you can make something funny in a dark situation, then you're in the right place. And we've seen some dark things, and I've been in some situations that are quite dark. I mean, one of the guys will just do a one-liner, and it will just change the whole mood of the group. Telling that joke in front of other people, they may not understand it. They may think it's quite crude, but it's just the time and the place. So yeah, I think you have to look inwards. You don't take yourself too seriously, and just try and find humor when you can. Because if you spent 6 months being stoic and rigid, it's going to be a long 6 months.
So I know that your formal military career ended with an injury, which of course is interesting to us since we work with a lot of injured people. Yeah. But I know that led to a huge transition in your life, which is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, and we love to talk with our guests about on the Ready State, because we've had so many athletes and former military, in particular, who go through these really difficult transitions.
And for context, my professional paddling career on the national team ended with a neck injury.
Yeah.
So suddenly yanked
Yeah.
away with who are you? What do you do? What's the next play?
So tell it what happened. What happened in your injury, and tell us a little bit about what it was like afterwards.
Yeah, so we're about deployed to Afghanistan again, and we're out in Oman doing pre-deployment training, and I was doing what's called a HALO jump. It's a high altitude, high opening jump. So HALO is skydiving, so you're free of any lines. But HALO, you're actually still connected to the aircraft. It's called a static line. And you exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet because that's the limits of oxygen. Anything higher, and you need to be on O2. And the parachute then opens, and then you can travel up to 30 minutes in the air or 50 kilometers to the target area. So it's a method of insertion. So we'd done this before. We did it on previous deployments operationally, but we had some young guys just past selection, so they were going through the course. So our sergeant major said, "Go do some fun jumps." So, but the one thing the military do is they take great sports like skiing, diving, and parachuting, and they don't make it fun. And said, "I don't believe there's a thing called fun jumping." So we went out. I think it was about the third or fourth jump of the day. I normally like to be number one at the door and then jump back. But they put me in the middle of the stick just to rotate the teams around. And as I exited the aircraft, I did my compulsory count, and my eyes were open. I'm like, I'm not even looking in the right direction. I was actually looking up at my foot, which was caught in the line above my head. So my worry was, I only have a few seconds. I mean, that's now going to go taut and then open the parachute. So I need to clear my leg. I couldn't clear my leg in time. It pulled my leg over my head and to the right. But thankfully, my ankle did clear from the line. Otherwise, my leg would have come completely off and I would have bled out before I hit the deck. So straight away, the pain, I'd never experienced pain like it. I was vomiting because of the pain. Because of the altitude was so thin, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. So every time I was gaining consciousness, I could see I was in line with the guys and I was flying in the right direction. But as I started descending, the air got thicker and then, I was a bit more conscious. So I was flying towards a target area, and my worry was about landing it because I have one leg that's bad and I have one good leg. If I don't land it well, I could potentially damage the good leg. But I approached we call it a NATO T. It's like a T as you look down towards the drop zone. I mean, you want to be heading towards, so you look at the T's in front of you. So I did that, landed one-legged. It was a perfect landing. But unfortunately, the injury sustained in the air, I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadriceps. So all the supporting muscles as well. So I got sent straight to an MRI scan. And it was the same time as the Icelandic volcano, which had grounded. I don't think it affected US much, but in UK and Europe, you couldn't fly aircraft. And so I was stuck in a hotel in Muscat in Oman on painkillers for 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we remember that, but it just didn't directly impact
The
us
wind
unless we
was
were trying to fly to
the
the
wind was
UK.
going
Yeah.
east. Yeah,
Right.
you guys were good,
Yeah.
but the UK and Europe, everything was grounded. And so came back from that, got an Aeromed flight from the military. And then there was a whole spiral of errors. The military lost my MRI scans. And it was just, really you should be working on that injury straight away. Normally you can do something with an ACL tear if you have your muscles, but I didn't have my muscles as well. And so unfortunately, the damage sustained ended my career after 16 years. And as you touched on transition, I saw my friends going off to Afghanistan and I was going off in another direction. But for me, I was going through what was known as an identity crisis. I joined the military at 17. I was now 33. Spent my whole military career getting to where I wanted to in the special forces. And it's like professional sports. You train to be the best in the world. And then an injury comes along and just changes that course. And so, I was going through an identity crisis. I got to where I was in the military through my physical robustness. I couldn't even now run 50 meters without my knee giving way. But also, Alana, my wife, was 8 months pregnant. I was worried about how am I going to support my family? What is my role within society? Before I knew what I was doing for the next 2 years, day in, day out. Now I didn't know what I was doing next week.
And when an injury like that happens, does the military say it's over for you? Like, do they show you the door, or they like, you can stick around, but you have to work at a desk? I mean, what's the play there? Like, how do they handle that?
I think the way they handled it was quite poor. I was an instructor on the Tier 2 Commando course back in 2001 when I was 24 years old, and I had a lateral meniscus tear there. They operated within five days, and within 6 weeks, I was running 30 milers with the recruit. So I was back in. It was just the fact that there was a whole spiral of errors, and it was almost like, well, when you're injured, you're no use to us, sort of thing. And so I ended up leaving. So it was partly being shown the door and also sort of resenting the way that I was treated. But even it took me 5 years to win a tribunal hearing against the military to get my correct pension. And so everyone has this perception that, you are the best special forces in the world. You guys get treated like that. But unfortunately, that's not the case. As soon as they've had enough of you, it's like a company. They don't need you.
It reminds me so much of professional athletes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much overlap. Right?
I think the word is chattel.
Yeah, right.
You're treated like
Right,
chattel.
yeah.
You are with your partner. You have a baby in.
Yeah.
How much, already being a spouse of someone in a tier 1 service is tricky. Those are tricky relationships. There's a lot of weird pressure and travel. Suddenly you're home and you have no identity, or your identity's been stripped. How did you, and the setting up that you and your wife have a podcast talking about all of the support networks and all the sort of, hidden structures behind excellence and really extraordinary achievements. Is that a moment where is some of your current experience based on that? How did you handle those moments together? Did you do it gracefully? Because I can tell you, I'm married to a savage 3-time world champion.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would have not have done it gracefully.
Yeah, I wasn't doing it gracefully. I met Alana probably about a year before. So Alana saw me at my best. She saw me when I was at my height in the special forces, loving it, and she was fully behind it. And then she saw me at my worst. Thankfully for me, Alana is very entrepreneurial. She is the brains behind everything that we do. She set up our first security company in 30 minutes just watching TV. She does the banking. The minute I sort of joke that the minute she's like your mother, your father, they clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. You don't know who's providing the electricity, the gas, because you need to be concentrating on your job. And Alana came in and picked up that role from them. So she ended up being like my new boss. And so she guided me and gave me direction. So I think if it wasn't for Alana, I don't think we'd be having this conversation now. She was a catalyst in that part of my life and still is 15 years on. So, a huge part. And I do see people when they leave, the transition can be quite smooth or can be quite turbulent. And I tend to find it depends on their support network. Some guys do 22 years and they're at the end of their career and their wives are like, right, you now look after the kids. I'm going to go off. Or some of them end up getting divorced because they realize that actually they can't actually live together. They spent 20 plus years married, but they've never actually lived together as well. So I think we have a 95% divorce rate. It's as high as our selection failure process as well. So
8 out of 200.
So she was huge in that period in my life in being able to sort of pick me up when I was down and sort of give me direction.
I can totally relate to that. I kid around that we famously or infamously had a bad swim on a big Class 5 river at a World Championships, and Juliet saved me. She pulled me out of the water. Yeah. And I always say that's the first time she saved my life. Come with me if you want to live. And where do you think she learned that resilience? Because so much of your current business, your writing, your podcasting, you can see this through narrative between the two of you, where you get some formal training, you have an identity, theoretically, elite military service sets us up for having at least a model and a framework to just manage catastrophe. Where did she learn that, do you think?
Yeah, so Alana's story, a picture book. She has a book called She Who Dares, and it's about her life. And Alana's had some trauma in her life. Her mum passed away when she was young. She was 15. There's been sexual trauma. There's been a number of things, and she's still almost been the light shining in the dark. She's such a lovely person. So she has a lot of resilience anyway. Before even I met her, where we sort of really connected was we knew that we were going to be able to support each other and push each other, and test each other. As not hold each other back. So when I actually met Alana, she always said the first time she fell in love with me. When I met Alana, she was working in a bank in Aberdeen. She ran about 4 banks up there. And I asked her, I said, what is it you've always wanted to, and this is the first week I met her. I said, what is it you've always wanted to do? And she said, I've always wanted to be a spy. And so Aberdeen is like the oil and gas capital of Europe. It's like Houston. So very male centric. And so she's always been told to, stay in your lane, don't start daydreaming. So I said, well, what have you done about it? And she goes, well, I was always told, not to do it. So the next day I rang my friend. He was a chief instructor at the MI6. And I printed off the joining instructors and I came in the bank and I said, look, here's the guy, give him a call. And she realized then that this guy was going to push her. So I push her and then she also pushes me. I believe that she can do it. I mean, she believes that I can. And so it's just been a real blessing and a great teamwork.
That's so cool. So you mentioned MI6, but I will say when I was doing my research about you and saw that you were a security consultant, I had like every vision of every MI6 TV show I watch, including one I'm presently watching, as well as like a James Bond vision. Like I went full Hollywood on your career in terms of what I envision you're actually doing as a security consultant. Yeah. I imagine much of it is mundane and not exciting. And then I imagine you also do some bonker stuff. So what is it like? And I'm sure there's a lot of NDAs and confidentiality involved, but I don't know if there's any kind of funny, crazy stories about what it means to be a security consultant that you can share. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So Alana as well, when I decided I was getting out, Alana works a lot in the human trafficking area. And one of her friends was the Haiti earthquake and she was helping an orphanage. And I think there was a $5 ransom on her head. The people wanted her dead. And she was trying to get private security. But it comes at a cost. And so she couldn't afford that. So Alana said, I'd love to be in a position one day that we can provide that security for her. So actually, when Alana realized I was getting out, this is before she realized she was pregnant as well. There's a bit of an overlap. She decided we're going to work together. So she trained as a close protection officer. She was the first ship security officer female. She's done surveillance. And that was the aim. That was the plan for us to both work together. When you tell people,
it's a really exceptional and very strange couple goals.
Yeah. I think it was almost like we had visions of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith, something like that, just because it was just something different and niche as well, which I didn't see anyone else doing in the industry. And that was the thing. I was trying to find a niche within the industry. And when you tell people you're in the security industry and you're 200 pounds, you've got a bald head and tattoos and muscles, they think you're a doorman from the local nightclub. This security industry is very, very diverse. But my first job was helping set up the British Embassy in Benghazi during the Arab Spring. And so for me, I soon identified that I call them the big five, the largest security companies in the world were charging 6-7-figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. And so I said to Alana, this might be our niche. And so I bought 30 weapons off the black market and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt and buried it with communications kit and money and designed our own evacuation plans and sold it to the oil and gas sector. And hopefully never needing to use them. But the great thing I had with Alana, she never wanted that stability as in financial stability. She believes money comes and goes. She didn't put me under pressure to be working on a 6-week rotation. A lot of my friends were doing the anti-piracy stuff. So I was working on ad hoc. So every time my phone would go off, I was in another country learning about another area within the security industry. And in a short period of time, I was building up this huge network around the world of subject matter experts. I'd seen what the military had shown me, and they will only show you what you need to see. I didn't see how, all this, everything else within what's going on in these countries. And, each phone call was slightly different. One would be, can you take the UAE Royal Family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives? The next one, I'm training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. Next one, I'm in Cape Town protecting a client who's got death threats in a court case. So, I was learning a lot about this industry. But September 11th, 2012, I just finished the London Olympics and your American ambassador got killed. I mean, a movie called 13 Hours. You wear this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I was there. I don't know if it was right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time. But I was there that evening, and I was tasked to help a German oil company, and so I evacuated 8 German oil engineers on my own with my fixer through safe houses I had in Libya back to Tripoli. Because of the success of that, 2 years later, I'm now covering the Soccer World Cup in Brazil with Visa. So it always seems at the back end of these big sporting events, always end to have a good high. I mean, you hit a big low. And then I was asked to evacuate the Canadian embassy. So I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Tripoli to Tunis. And so that's where Alana and I then become specialists in the crisis management. And more recently, we got 1,200 out of Afghanistan, Thomson Reuters, USA, none of them are clients. And we're a husband-wife business, not a multi-billion-pound business. We've got 220 Americans out of Israel. So we've found our niche within the security as the go-to for crisis management and evacuation plans. But it works really well in the fact that Alana plans the operations. She coordinates with all the clients who need help, and then I'm the person on the ground. But where I sort of go with that is, everyone sees Hollywood doesn't help matters. Jason Statham, Dwayne Johnson, special forces. It's always biceps, bullets, and bombs. The offensive action, which is 25% of what we do. 50% of what we do in the special forces isn't actually that sexy. It's support and influence in hearts and minds. Being embedded with locals, understanding the demographics, the politics, and the tribal influences. And that's what I've mastered over other security organizations. Is I'll go on my own in Yemen, Libya, Somalia, and I'll just make friends with locals. And that's what Alana says my USP is. I can make friends with anyone, whether you're a member of the royal family or a young homeless boy on the street in Mogadishu.
Hey, did you know we literally drink it every day?
Wait, I didn't get to say my part.
Do it.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by Element.
Look, one of the things that has been clear is that we have demonized salt, or we've overcomplicated hydration, right? We see a lot of people drinking a lot of water. One of the things that will change when you start Element is a lot of brain fog will go away. You'll start feeling better. And when you have those windows of opportunity to actually go exercise, you'll be prepared. One of the things that I'm noticing is that because we have fallen in love with the can of Element,
it's
Element
so good.
Sparkling, oftentimes I have like 2/3 of a dead soldier just hanging out.
No, you can never do that.
But I've been drinking it first thing in the morning. It is the best thing.
Yeah,
I will
just to
never
wake
drink
up versus
salted water
coffee.
again. Oh man, adding an Element first thing in the morning will change your life. Do this before you drink your coffee.
The other thing that's happened recently is that we took our daughter to the pediatrician, and she has kind of low side blood pressure. And our pediatrician was like, hey, you've got to make sure that you are adding, to her, said, you've got to make sure you're adding electrolytes to your water.
she's an athlete too.
And she's an athlete. So she's been really diligently adding Element to her water every single day, and already reports that she's not feeling as lightheaded when she gets out of the pool, and overall feeling better and just not kind of low blood pressure-y. So really has helped her a lot as well.
Must be nice being an athlete with that low blood pressure, Caroline.
Right?
Look, if you want to learn more, if you want to upgrade your life, go order through our link. You'll get a free sample pack with all of the Element flavors. And if you want to part of your mouth, of course, try the sparkling.
It's so good.
Go to drinklmnt.com/TRS.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by Momentous, and we are...
hang on.
No, I get to say it. Don't even...
No,
me.
I am tired of being dragged through security with your little bags of suspicious white powder.
I mean, that's true. So, obviously we are fans of creatine. We consider it to be part of our most critical stack of supplements that we would, probably that and protein would be our top 2, especially given the well-known and vast benefits of creatine.
Yeah, it's
and
one of the
very
5 guaranteed supplements that actually does something for you.
Yeah, and the research backs that up. But because it's something that we are committed to and take every day, every time I go on a trip, I fill up a little Ziploc bag with some guess amount of creatine that I might need on my trip. And so I'm always going through security with a little bag of white powder, which does feel weird.
It does feel weird.
Guess what? That's over.
I think your Miami Vice days have sunset because when Momentous has has single serving creatine packets.
I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. Like, I will have those things floating around in my backpack. And the other thing about it is it's not just for travel. I mean, I actually have days
Convenience.
where I forget and I'm at the office all day and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to throw my scoop of creatine in my drink this morning.
What we've seen is that universally in our professional sports, you'd think that if you're an athlete, your job is just to eat, but it's the same thing that you have, the resistance, or you forget, or you get into something else.
Yeah.
In the NFL, they'll put the supplement cart on through the weight room on the way to the practice field. So the guys have to walk past it. We literally handshakes to NBA basketball players as they come back into the locker room to recover, to start turning this process. If we don't make it that obvious, it doesn't get done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. This is just the most obvious way to make it easier for us to be consistent on one of these supplements
100%.
that, we know, before what would happen is sometimes we would travel and, take 6 days off of taking creatine or bring the white powder with us. And this is just such an easy way to make it consistent for us.
Yeah, I'm such a thrill. Anytime we can reduce the barrier to adherence,
Yep.
take out
We're
a
all
step
in. We're
between
all
you
in.
and doing something, you're all in.
I'm thrilled too.
Are you thrilled too? I think you like being sketchy. If you want to be less sketchy like Juliet, go to livemomentous.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase of less sketchiness.
Holy bonkers.
Yeah.
I just have to go back to the fact that you started that story about burying like 30 black market weapons and a bunch of cash in Tunisia. And have you
As one does. Hashtag Tuesday.
Did that come of use before we move on? Did you unbury it?
I've never had to use a weapon yet. Everything's understanding. I always say that you go from the security industry, you go from being the bravest in the world in the special forces to the biggest coward. And it's not because you don't want trouble. You just basically identify where the trouble are and you go around it.
You avoid it.
You avoid it. Yeah.
You have a young family doing this crazy. How many children do you have?
We have 3 now. We have a 13-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son, and my daughter was 2 years old 2 days ago.
Oh man, you guys you're amongst it.
Yeah.
Where do you decide in all of this to pick up a bike and set a world record? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of free time that you're having. You're like, what am I going to do? I'm back home from the Yem. What should I do? And you just decide explain what your world record is and how you got that and where does that fit into all of this?
Yeah. And if I could just add to that, just one more question to that piece is, now that it's been a while and you've probably had a time to reflect on sort of the why did you do that?
Yeah. So the why was when I evacuated the Canadian embassy, I came home from that trip, and my normal standard operational procedure is I launder my clothes, charge my phone, and we wait for the next phone call because it could be anywhere in the world. And Alana had basically put 2 bottles of red wine on the table and sat me down. And chapter 16 in my book is called Dead or Divorced. This was a conversation we were about to have. She highlighted to me I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. We had our daughter, and what it was, I was totally disconnected from society. I thought evacuating embassies and doing other stuff very similar to that was just normal, and she's like, this isn't normal. And so I was trying to match the adrenaline rush that I had when the special forces without really coming to terms with the fact that I'd left. And this was 5 years later. So Alana was as I said, she's entrepreneurial. One of her businesses was property developing, which has really taken off. She said, you don't need to be doing this, come work with me. And going back to the behind the scene podcast that we talk about, what we realized is we hadn't really communicated properly. I thought she wanted me to be going away to be earning money, and she thought I wanted to be going away. And that wasn't really the case. Actually, we wanted to be together. We just never communicated. My father died that year as well. And I literally buried him I buried him that morning. I was on a flight in the afternoon. I was just so stoic. It was untrue. And so that's what I did.
Can you relate to that?
I took a sabbatical. You can relate to that. I took a sabbatical from the security industry, and I bought a road bike off Amazon, and it was a cyclocross bike, So I had thick tires because Aberdeen had a lot of potholes, and just cycled to and from the office. And it was only about 8 miles there, 8 miles back, but just being physically active again, as in cardio. I felt like there was a huge weight off my shoulders. So you've heard some of my backstory. I'm sat in these architects and planners meetings with Alana, and she's chatting about the construction of this building. And our son Tommy was born now, and I'm sat there in the corner bottle feeding him. And my wife could see that glaze over my eyes, and she said, "Right, you need to do something to keep yourself physically and mentally engaged." So it was about a month before my 40th birthday, and I was like, "Well, I always fancied doing a world record." And so she said, "Well, what in?" I said, "Well, cycling's good. It's not been hurting my knee." And I'd only cycled 20 miles. So she said, "Oh." So we could buy the Guinness Book of Records, and we're looking through. I was looking at my road to Cape Town, but I'd actually spent a lot of my time in Africa with work. And then Alana then found the world's longest road, the Pan American Highway, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. So I always joked that she clearly wanted me out of the house at this point. And so I said, "Yeah, that sounds perfect." So having only cycled 20 miles, sounds quite arrogant, I applied for the world record. And 6 weeks later, Guinness came back and said, "You've been successful on your application." So that was the Pan American Highway. Alana and I do a lot in we talked about the security stuff. We do a lot in the nonprofit area as well. It's her especially with human trafficking, me more in the veteran space. And so a good friend of mine, he's probably one of the best philanthropists in the world, is Prince Harry. So him and I have been good friends for 17 years. So I rang him up and I said, "Look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. What should we do it for?" And him and his brother and Kate were just about to launch a campaign called Heads Together, which was a mental health campaign. And I'd seen mental health firsthand in the military, but not throughout the whole of society. Postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, all the way through. So that was the campaign. The target was 117 days, and we set a target of £1 million. And then I trained for 14 months. Alana ran the whole campaign, did the fundraising, managed to get me £500,000 sponsorship as a non-cyclist with one of the brands, and which meant that every penny that we raised went towards the actual charities themselves.
It sounds so good on paper. We've got a prince backing you. You're doing the right thing for the right reason. Yeah. When does the reality hit of what 10, 12 hour, is it not a big step because you've spent so many hours alone rucking that you're like, oh, it's just a different kind of suffering in a different way? Or does it start to feel different and you realize, ooh,
not at all, actually. I knew going into it, mentally I had and physically I had the endurance. I think, I'm actually, one of the things, because I know there's so many people out there that are fit enough to do this, but can they do it for like 100 days in their own space? And so for me, Alana, I always say it's like 80% mental, 20% physical. And Alana summed it up. It's like, it's how you deal with boredom. It's how people deal with boredom. And I just call it a daydream. I'm a visionary, so I just drift away. So when I'm on the bike, I listen to music and I just start drifting away. But my injured leg, when I started the bike ride, my injured leg was 2 kilos or 5 pounds lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. So, I needed to get that back. I did a century ride within the first week and realized actually this is going to be a lot harder than I think. I had 60-year-old guys taking me on this bike ride. But knew it was going to sort of come with time. I knew I just had to apply everything into a different sport. We were also planning the whole operation ourselves. So for me, I just took a military set of orders and I just put it on to this challenge and just crossed out ammunition and just did all the planning around it.
Well, that brings it up because, what they say is that beginners talk tactics and experts talk logistics. Not only do you have the greatest general in your camp, your logistics, wife. Savage wife, but with the security services, I don't think people understand how difficult it is to put 100 days together. Where you're going to sleep, how do you refuel, where are the cars, what are the visas? Yeah. Could you talk just about that logistic? Because
Yeah.
it is one thing to physically just get on the bike and do it. That's really extraordinary, day after day. Eventually, that just takes care of itself
and
if you can do it.
quick side story, there was that documentary about the 14 peaks, the
Right.
guy who climbed all those.
NIMS.
Yeah. And to us, obviously climbing the peaks was cool. But what we were blown away by was how they pulled off the logistics of getting him to all the mountains with the right equipment, right? It was the logistics that blew our minds, not the feat of climbing the mountains, actually.
Nims
to us, it's the same.
Yeah, Nims was in my team in the SBS, and actually Nims approached me after I did my bike ride and said, we get this challenge, gave him motivation to do 14 peaks. And
I love
amazing.
it.
Yeah, he came to us for some advice right at the beginning stages. Yeah, so yeah, I know Nims. But the the first point was you submit your route to Guinness. I'd spoken to the previous record holders. And one of the reasons we're the best special forces in the world isn't because we have the best caliber of guys in training. It's because we're always learning from our mistakes. We're always learning and evolving. So one of the things we used to do when we used to come off the ground on operations or on training, before we go clean our weapons, have food or whatever, have a shower, we do what's called a hot debrief. I think the Americans call it a wash up. And basically you have 3 questions, and it's what worked, what didn't work, and if I was to do that again, what would I do differently? So I was reading magazines, I was reading books about the Pan American Highway, but I wasn't getting that critical information I needed for the planning on this. So I reached out to the previous record holders and I asked them those questions. And they all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina. But all their issues were in South and Central America, be it language, spares for the bike, bureaucracy. So for me, although they went that way, one thing I was quite proud of, I turned it on his head. I said, I will start in the South and get those issues out of the way early. But as you touched on, I had Guinness there was no distinction between supported and unsupported. I'm a new cyclist. So we had a support team. I thought, we'll have a mechanic, we'll have a soft tissue therapist, we'll have a medic, always helps. We had a documentary team. So when you're planning this as well, they're a bit more risk averse than myself. I'm also having to think about their welfare as well. They're not willing to bury weapons around the world and smuggle people across borders. So I have to be thinking about their welfare as well. And as you touched on, we have 14 countries, and each country is different. Are you going? What's the best time of the year? It's going to give me the best advantage weather-wise going through this challenge. What is there any elections, any political unrest, any civil unrest that you can encounter along the way? I think 4 weeks after going through Nicaragua, there was a coup. So we missed the coup by 4 weeks. And so there's all these other things you have to consider. You need to think about, as you touched on, visas, border crossings, safe houses, food, the lot. And it started becoming a really big operation to plan. And so, if you can, the cycling, I joke when the cycling's the easiest part. When you're sort of coordinating all that behind the scenes, which Alana sort of ran anyway, which was perfect for me. So I could just focus on what I needed to.
So 2 things. Do you think the reason that Guinness approved your application is sort of knowing that you had the special forces background and maybe appreciating exactly what we've been talking about, which is that the logistics are what is going to make or break this. And knowing that you had this background, I mean, do you think that was a big part of their approval process? I have to think it was, but who knows?
No, because even at that point, I didn't even know I was having a sport team or a documentary team. It was literally the first thing I did. But to apply for Guinness, it's not 100% successful. It's quite hard to get them to come.
Yeah, I figure.
It's like a pitch. It's like doing a sales pitch. But I really pushed on the charity angle. I pushed on the charity angle. We were raising money. And I also, I don't know whether they liked the fact that I'd only cycled 20 miles or thought there was madness in it. I know when I broke the world record, they did do a tweet, Guinness, and said it was probably one of the most maddest bike rides I've ever heard of. Because people had done it before, but not a 40-year-old guy who's overcycled 20 miles. My sponsorship marketing team did a SWOT analysis, which is the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats. And the only weakness that came back was my arrogance towards the cycling community, which I just took as a strength. I was like, it's fine. But in fairness, no one from the cycling community ever discredited. I could imagine it looks, for those that do this for a living, it could be like, what's this guy now doing in our yard? But there's no point.
By the way, we know about what a SWOT analysis is because we made our daughter make a PowerPoint presentation about why she should be allowed to have Snapchat. And in her PowerPoint presentation, she made a SWOT analysis, which to this day is really comical.
Welcome to being a starette.
Yeah, I was like, it's pretty comical.
One of our good friends, Rebecca Rush, rode the Ho Chi Minh Trail in search of her father's crash site. He was a F-4 pilot in Vietnam, and she rode down and found his crash site. And just there's a documentary on Red Bull about it, and it's just the surprising logistics, and that there's not a road, and that I guess we're hiking through the jungle at this point to get to this next road. And I think it's so surprising, the adventure along the way. I want to talk about the podcast, because especially at the high, sort of what it seems like you're trying to talk about, but quickly, like, what was the greatest moment on that ride? What surprised you about that experience? Because if you're good at doing things that are hard, then you just start setting things up and you get them done. And it's really, a lot of our friends actually don't fail very often because they're so tactical about the big risks that they're taking, and they're so methodical.
Yeah.
What really surprised you about this experience?
I think there's
because I would bet on you guys just based on your track record, your body, your ability, your training. I'd be like, of course they're going to do it.
Yeah. I think I heard someone say that if you can get to the start point uninjured, you're 75% of the way there. It's all in your side. So there's a few things on this one. You know, and they all come in together. So I took, you know, I think the first week I had some strong winds, and I was a week behind. A week into it, I was 39 miles behind target. But my target, although it was 117 days, was 110 days. And so I gave myself some fudge. So I was always ahead of the target. And so we took, you know, going from south to north was a great decision from a cycling perspective, because I had a tailwind all the way through Peru. You know, it's 2,500 kilometers tailwind. You know, I got food poisoning twice in Peru. I crashed my bike in Chile, got knocked off my bike in Colombia, but still took 10 days off the South America world record. But one thing that surprised me is we haven't changed the vehicles in every country, which was slowing me up. So this was one that caught me out. Is Alana, as I said, was planning everything. I was in Ecuador climbing the big mountains about 2 weeks out from Cartagena. And she rang me to say, we basically had an RV and a 4x4 in Fort Lauderdale, which was going to get shipped to Panama. I mean, that meant those vehicles would take us all the way onwards to Alaska, and we wouldn't have to keep swapping them out. She rang me to tell me that the vehicles hadn't been loaded onto the shipping container and they were still in Fort Lauderdale. But she said, look, no, I'll sort it out, and then I'd trust Alana. And she did. So Alana, her PA, and two of my friends flew out. They had foresight to get out there quite early, and they picked up the vehicles and drove the vehicles 4,000 miles in 8 days from Florida all the way down to Panama. I broke the world record in Cartagena in the morning about 8 o'clock. Took the noon flight to Panama because you can't cross the Darien Gap. You know, it's the only point you can't cross. And Alana came in, drove the vehicles in, handed over the keys, and we went on. So that was a huge, and that's why another reason about behind the scene. Everyone sees you on the bike, they see you on social media, you doing it, but it's the team around you what they don't see, and that was a huge part of the success of this. And then other things that people didn't see as well. I got into North America on day 70, and I was 14 days ahead of the world record. I'm like, perfect. I can relax a bit. You know, having spoken to previous record holders, hopefully now all my issues should be behind me. You know, it should be, plain sailing. Everyone speaks my language. The culinary options are a lot better. And Alana, as I said, she keeps all those distractions away from me. And I had 5 missed calls from her, and I was like, so I thought straight away there was something wrong with our kids. And I rang her and I said, are you okay? She goes, yeah. She goes, what do you wear to a royal wedding? I said, sorry. She goes, oh, we've been invited to the royal wedding, Harry and Meghan's wedding. I said, oh, that's nice. She goes, no, you don't realize. She goes, you're now a day behind. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. I'm now a day behind. But we couldn't tell anyone on social media because no one would, it's all still quite secret. So I had 17 days planned for North America. I was in Lubbock the next day, had 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes. That kept me, and I was now 2 days behind. And you might know an app called Windy TV. Have you heard that? Windy TV?
No, we haven't.
Popular with
We heard of it.
sailors. Yeah, it was like my second wife. I was literally looking at it all the time. It's popular with sailors and cyclists, actually. And it gives you the strength and directions of the winds forecast every hour for the next 2 weeks. And so you just move it hour by hour and you see the changes. And so I just put pen to paper and made a plan. I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to miss the next weather window. And I did the majority of my cycling at night in North America because security-wise, it was a lot better. So I was playing chess with Mother Nature, and I picked up a nice tailwind in Cheyenne, did 270 miles in 11 hours with 10,000 feet of climbing. So I had 17 days planned for North America. I did it in 11 and a half days. But again, no one could know my reasoning for trying to get ahead. And then I'm a week outside in a town called Whitehorse. And I'm like, perfect. The world record's in the bag. The royal wedding's in the bag. I can relax. And then you mentioned Red Bull earlier. There was a cyclist, a professional cyclist who's sponsored by Red Bull, has 3 other endurance world records. He's like 26 years old. And he'd come out on social media that day and said that he was going to cycle this in August and be the first man to do it under 100 days. So every time I hit my objective, the goalpost kept moving. So I cycled for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in minus 18 to come in 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. So for me, the thing that surprised me about this challenge, it wasn't a challenge. If it was 117 days, it would have been a breeze. It was the fact that I had to keep going faster and faster, and I couldn't tell anyone why.
Okay, so amazing. And first of all, congratulations. That's a bonker story.
Yeah.
No, I mean, congratulations on getting the wedding invite. That's
well,
what
that's
we
what
care
I'm saying.
about.
So, I mean,
come
I
on.
have to ask. So did you basically end up somewhere in Alaska and like get on a helicopter to a plane and find yourself like in a suit? How many hours later?
Yeah,
And what was that like?
I finished on the 11th of May. So Alana and the kids had also flown to Prudhoe Bay. So they're the first kids to be on this Arctic oil rig in the Arctic Ocean or on this field.
Great.
And so, I mean, one thing I failed to mention, as well as breaking the world record, Alana then raised $1.4 million for the mental health, every penny going towards the charity, which was more impressive, I thought. But yeah,
Amazing.
so I finished on the 11th of May. We then got the flight from there to Anchorage, got back to UK. I think we got back to UK on something like the 16th. 16th. I mean, the wedding was like the 18th, literally. And I'd lost, I started at 90 kilos. I was 78 kilos. I was a mess. The suit was literally.
You just wore like a dangly suit.
Well, no, Alana, once she told me we were going to the wedding, she was asking for my measurements because she was getting me a morning suit. And so we were measuring me all the way through North America for the last time, the closest time they needed the measurements. And so, yeah, it fitted okay. But what I'd have liked to have had, I would have had like time to appreciate what I'd done, and also time to spend with my family. I'd done 3.5 months away from my family to all of a sudden having one big high to then probably a big high within 48 hours. And no one really cared about no one really cared. When you're doing, I had 30 TV interviews in less than 36 hours. And it was all about, what's it like to be invited to the wedding? What canapes do you think, what champagne? Like, really? I'm just become the first.
Yeah, you're like,
I didn't care. It was almost that overshadowed the challenge. So I wish I had a bit of time to appreciate what I'd done before I then went into the next high.
Talk just for a second. I know you are clearly very good at stories. This is fantastic. How do you start this podcast, and why do you focus on what you're focusing on? We've touched a little bit, but this really resonates with me that, Juliet and I sometimes have felt like people don't understand that we're a dyad and that any success we've had is because there's 2 of us together. And it's not just one of us, out on the point, and people just really don't understand. And they don't understand also the incredible teams and networks and family and all the things that work. How do you come across wanting to talk about that and illuminating that?
Yeah, because I spent, as I said, I think I mentioned earlier, people would see me. People were like, "Oh, Dean. No, Dean's great at this. Dean's great." I wouldn't be having these conversations if it wasn't for Alana. And so, for me, like another one, like the special forces, I think it's the same ratio here in the US. For every special forces operator to go out the door, it takes 7 other people in the military to enable that. It's the team behind the team. Yes, we're at the spearhead, we're at the front, but none of it would be achievable without that support behind you. And so for me, I really wanted to highlight, it is Alana, and I know, and I'll talk about, Alana got awarded the MBE last year, the Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire from King Charles for her services to human trafficking and to mental health. Which for me, I was over the moon, because I was there you go. She's been credited for all the hard work that she's done. And so I then started looking at people that I know certain individual celebrities, and I'm like, you wouldn't be there if it wasn't for your wife. I know what goes on behind the scenes. If I need something from you, I'm not going to email you or message you. I'm going to message your wife. And so it would then become a common theme that there was a lot of partners who were successful. One might be the one at the front, but they would never be in that position, one for the wife. So behind the scene is a play on words, SWEN, the one that the world sees. But also, you don't have to be a successful business person, a sports person, a TV celebrity. Any relationship, it's all about working together. And unfortunately for females, because of their sex, if they tend to be the ones that put their careers on pause to start a family. And so, they've paused, and then their husbands carry on doing what they're doing. They're achieving their aims and achieving their goals. And there can be resentment from one partner to the other if she feels like, he's achieved his dreams and I'm left behind. So it's talking about communicating how you can both be successful. So I think that's where Alana is talking, that we can both be successful if we work together. We're at a point now where Alana is now at the front and I'm now behind. I'm now Alana's assistant. Joking.
So great.
Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to tell people is it is hard in relationships, but you can achieve great things. But you can achieve even greater things if you work together.
And tell our listeners the name of your podcast so they can seek it out.
Yeah, it's Behind the Scene, SWEN, Behind the Scene podcast. Yeah, and what we're doing is we're doing it in seasons because we're struggling with our diaries. So we'll do 10 recordings and then we'll go on to the next. So yeah, Behind the Scenes. So we'll be releasing season 3 soon.
I love this, and I like to describe myself as Juliet Starrett support staff, and I'm happy to be there. It's I just get drug along in her wake my whole the last 20 plus years of my life. I can't even say anything. She's like, "That's right."
That's correct.
I mean, nothing else needs to be said. Like nothing else.
And
I
also try to describe myself sometimes as I'm like the broken anchor of the relationship. Mm-hmm. I'm just holding this down. I'm like a useless anchor. I'm not even an anchor that like actually stops you. I'm just like dead.
I think where you guys and where me and Alana, we understand our strengths and weaknesses. Alana can't ride a bike 14,000 miles, but what she can do is she can plan a whole campaign, so it's understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are in the relationship. I'm the extrovert, I'm the storyteller, I'm the door opener. Alana's the introvert, but I never talk contracts with people because I don't understand contracts because I come from a world where we don't have contracts in the special forces. No one gives us gives us a proposal or an NDA if we're planning a mission. It's automatically done. So we just.
You didn't get a contract to bury the money and weapons in Tunisia?
Yeah, that was Alana's contract. She wrote that one.
I love that you are chatting up this amazing woman who is running banks. I'm on the bank in Chile talking to Juliet, and she's already a world champion and very successful, but she's going to law school. And I was like,
Yeah.
I like to say that I'm smarter than I look, and it sounds like you are too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Dean, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. So fun. I feel like we could continue this at the dinner table and hear even more bonkers stories. So hopefully we get to do that in person at some point.
Meet the other 2/3.
Yeah. And please tell people where they can find you. And, I know you have a book out in the world and a website. So direct people where the best place is to learn more and follow your current and future adventures.
Yeah, so I am on social media, Instagram and Facebook as Dean Stott. If you go deanstott.com, you'll see the website, and then you can find me there. I mean, one thing I'd just like to highlight we're launching now is the Blue Rose Foundation, where Alana and I are going to be tackling human trafficking.
Fantastic.
I was very fortunate this year to also get awarded the MBE from King Charles for my services to sport.
Yay, congratulations.
Mental health and evacuations. So we've now built that sort of credibility. And the Blue Rose Foundation tackles education, task force, and rehabilitation for victims of human trafficking. So that's our next goal.
bluerose.com. Where do we find that?
Blue Rose Foundation website will be launching next week. But if you go onto my website, I'll guidepost everyone to that.
Perfect. Well, we'll link all those in the show notes. And Dean, total pleasure. Thank you again.
And I can't wait to have you both on talking about this next project.
Yeah, well, definitely. I'll get the boss on next time. Yeah, like I'm not joking when I say I am her assistant. My new role now is her assistant. I know we've got a couple of minutes. We have a good friend of ours who has a thing called the Culture Index, and it has 19 types of individuals. And Alana's an architect, and I'm a technical expert. But an architect can only work with 2 people, and I'm luckily one of them. So we were looking at getting assistants for Alana, and they just weren't fitting the mold. And we spoke to Michael and said, "Well, who's the best assistant for Alana?" And he said, "Dean." And so that's my role now. I am Alana's assistant.
Oh,
yeah,
I love it. I love it.
I love it. Well, thank you again so much for being here, and to be continued, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You've got